He told her to sign the papers on a Tuesday morning, the same morning she had driven 40 minutes to the county clerk's office to file the deed transfer on a building she had never wanted in the first place. She did not cry. Claudette Voss had not cried in front of a man since 1987, and she was not about to start again at 53. She signed. And if you think that's where the story ends, you haven't heard anything yet. Stay with us, because what happened to Claudette in the 3 years after that Tuesday is the kind of thing that makes you rethink everything you thought you knew about starting over. The building was called the Harmon Block. It sat on the corner of Delaney and Fifth in a small river town in eastern Tennessee called Garfield's Crossing, and had been in her late father-in-law's family since 1962. 4 stories of cream-colored brick, original tin ceilings on the ground floor, a busted freight elevator that hadn't moved since the Clinton administration, and a roof that wept every time it rained. Fletcher Voss had inherited it from his uncle 7 years into their marriage and had spent the next 18 years pretending to have plans for it. Plans that involved permits and contractors, and a vision that always seemed to be about 3 months away from becoming real. Claudette had attended enough of those dinners, the ones where Fletcher drew on napkins and talked about mixed-use development, while the other men at the table nodded into their bourbon, to know that the building was less a project and more a personality trait. It was something Fletcher needed to own more than he ever intended to fix. When the divorce papers came through, the Harmon Block came with them. Fletcher got the lake house, the retirement accounts, split, the good car, his, the business contacts, the golf membership, the friends who had always been a little more his than hers. All of it sorted and divided with the clinical efficiency of a man who had been consulting a lawyer for longer than he'd let on. And Claudette got the building. It appraised at $14,000, her sister Rennie told her, sitting across from her at the kitchen table of Claudette's new apartment. A 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a complex called Lakeview Terrace, which did not overlook any lake. $14,000. After the liens, I know what it appraised at. He gave you a money pit. I know what he gave me. Rennie set down her coffee cup. She was 2 years older than Claudette and had the particular kind of directness that comes from having watched someone you love make choices you'd warned them about. What are you going to do with it? Claudette looked out the window at the parking lot of Lakeview Terrace. A shopping cart was sitting in the middle of the handicap space. It had been there for 3 days. I haven't decided yet, she said. What you need to understand about Claudette is what she was before Fletcher and what she became during him. Before Fletcher, she had been an interior designer with a firm in Knoxville. Not famous, not wealthy, but good, genuinely good, the kind of good that comes from knowing how a room feels before you touch it, from understanding that light changes everything, and that most people don't know what they want until they see it. She had built a small book of clients, a reputation in commercial interiors, a name people passed along at dinner parties. During Fletcher, she had become his wife. That's not a condemnation. She had chosen it. He had been charming and certain in a way that felt like safety when she was 31, and she had wanted a home more than she'd wanted a career. And both things can be true at the same time. But over 18 years, the Claudette who knew how a room felt had gotten quiet. She'd done some volunteer work with the local preservation society. She'd advised friends on paint colors for free. She'd kept her licensing current in the way you keep something just in case, folded in the back of a drawer. When she walked into the Harmon Block for the first time as its sole owner, she had not worked professionally in 11 years. The ground floor had last been a pharmacy. The ghost of an old soda counter ran along the east wall. The chrome stripped but the bones still there. The 2nd and 3rd floors had been offices at some point, real estate company, insurance broker, a dentist who'd retired in 2009. The 4th floor was storage. Every floor smelled like old paper and river damp and something that might have been turpentine. She stood in the center of the ground floor for a long time. The tin ceiling above her was pressed in a medallion pattern, original to the building, caked in decades of paint but intact. The windows facing Delaney Street were 14 feet tall. Afternoon light came through them at an angle that turned the dusty air into something almost golden. Claudette took out her phone and took a picture, not for any reason, just because. Before we go any further, if you're new here, welcome to Giant Stories. We tell the stories of ordinary people who did extraordinary things when no one was watching. If that sounds like something you need in your life right now, hit subscribe. It's free, And it might be the best thing you do today. Now, back to Claudette. She did not make a dramatic decision that night. She did not wake up the next morning with a plan. What she did was call a contractor named Buddy Tatum, who had done some work on her and Fletcher's home years ago. And she asked him to come walk the building with her and tell her honestly what it would take to make it not fall down. Buddy walked every floor. He tapped walls. He looked at the freight elevator with an expression that suggested he had seen this particular kind of hopeless before. He climbed onto the roof with a flashlight while Claudette waited below on the sidewalk outside and watched a family walk past with a stroller. When he came back down, he sat on the bottom step of the staircase and looked at her. "How much money you got?" he asked. "Less than you're about to tell me I need." He nodded slowly. "Structural is actually okay. Bones are solid. Whoever built this in '62 didn't cut corners on the frame. Roof needs to be replaced, not patched. Electrical is a complete gut job. Plumbing on floors 2 and 3 is workable if you replace about 40% of it. HVAC doesn't exist, so you're starting from zero there. And the elevator?" Buddy said, "is a conversation for another day." She had $34,000 in savings, a car, a design license she hadn't used in over a decade, and a building that needed somewhere between $180,000 and $280,000 in work before anyone could legally occupy it. She drove home and sat in her parking lot for 45 minutes. Then she went inside and opened her laptop and started making a list. The first person she called was a woman named Glenda Fuchsis, who had been on the board of the Garfield's Crossing Preservation and Revitalization Commission for 12 years, and who Claudette had worked with briefly on a downtown mural project 7 years before. Glenda met her at the Harmon Block on a Thursday afternoon and walked the ground floor slowly, touching the tin ceiling medallions with the tips of her fingers. "There are 3 grant programs that cover historic commercial structures in this county," Glenda said. "The state has 2 more. None of them are fast. None of them are guaranteed. But this building," she turned around slowly, looking up, "this building qualifies for every single one." "How long would it take?" "For the applications, 4 to 6 months. For the money, assuming approval, another 6 to 9. Claudette did the math in her head. A year, minimum, before she saw $1 of grant money. And she still needed to make payments on the property taxes, which Fletcher had let lapse for 2 years before the divorce was finalized. "I also think," Glenda said carefully, "that if you position this right, you could attract a new markets tax credit investor. The census tract this building is in qualifies. I know a woman at a CDFI in Nashville who has been looking for projects in this corridor." Claudette did not know what a CDFI was. She did not say so, she wrote it down. That night she looked it up, Community Development Financial Institution. She read for 3 hours, she did not sleep much. But when she did, she dreamed about the tin ceiling. What happened over the next 14 months is the part of the story that people don't usually tell, because it isn't dramatic, and it doesn't make a good 10-second clip, and it requires sitting with someone long enough to understand what sustained effort actually looks like when the outcome is still uncertain. Claudette filed 4 grant applications. 2 were rejected. 1 was put on a waiting list. 1, a $47,000 historic preservation grant from the state, was approved in month 9. She wrote the applications herself, mostly at her kitchen table after midnight, in the particular quiet of a building that has no one else in it. She learned what period-appropriate materials meant in the context of preservation standards. She learned what lenders look for in a community development project. She learned the difference between a community benefit agreement and a development agreement, and why that difference matters, and how to explain it to a room full of people who might fund one but not the other. She made a presentation to the board of the Revitalization Commission and asked them to write a letter of support. They did. She drove to Nashville twice to meet with the woman at the CDFI that Glenda had mentioned. Her name was Tanya Osei, and she wore reading glasses on a chain and asked questions in the focused, methodical way of someone who has heard 10,000 pitches and can tell within the first 4 minutes whether the person sitting across from her has done the work. Claudette had done the work. She had a binder. She had projections. She had comps from 3 comparable historic renovation projects in similar census tracts in Tennessee and Kentucky. She had a phased development plan, ground floor as a mixed retail and cafe space, second floor as affordable professional suites for small businesses, third floor as artist live work studios, fourth floor deferred to phase 2. She had letters of interest from 2 potential tenants who hadn't signed anything yet, but who had told her face to face that they'd be first in line if she got it done. Tanya looked at the binder for a long time. "You said you haven't worked in this field professionally for 11 years, she said. "That's right. Why should I believe you can execute this?" Claudette had been waiting for that question. Not because she'd prepared a polished answer, but because she'd asked herself the same thing so many times in her car in the Lakeview Terrace parking lot, that she'd worn a groove in it. "Because I'm not doing this to prove something to anyone," she said. "I'm doing this because it's the only building I have and I understand it and I have nowhere else to go." That's not inspiration, that's just math. Tanya looked at her over the reading glasses. "Come back in 30 days with revised revenue projections on the professional suites," she said, "and find a way to bring your Phase 2 timeline in by 6 months. Claudette drove home and worked until 3 in the morning. She did not tell Fletcher about any of it. This requires some explanation, because they were not completely estranged. They had been married for 18 years. They had a daughter, Avery, who was 24, and lived in Chicago and called her mother every Sunday and had made it clear, in the careful way of an adult child who loves both parents, that she was not going to take sides. And because of Avery, there were occasional logistics, a graduation, a holiday, a birthday dinner at a neutral restaurant, where the adults in the room performed normalcy for the benefit of the young woman they had made together. At Avery's birthday dinner 7 months into the Harmon Block project, Fletcher mentioned casually that he'd heard from someone at the county recorder's office that Claudette had pulled a bunch of permits on the building. "I'm working on it," she said. "You know that building is going to cost more than it's worth," he said, not unkindly. This was the version of Fletcher that still believed he was helping. "You'd be better off selling the land and whatever's salvageable in the structure and cutting your losses." Avery looked at her mother. Claudette picked up her water glass. "I appreciate the thought," she said. Fletcher moved on to other subjects. Avery, under the table, found her mother's hand and squeezed it once. "Here's what we want you to sit with for a moment." Claudette Voss was 53 years old. She had $34,000 when she started. She had been out of her industry for 11 years. She was doing this in a town of 8,000 people, where everyone knew Fletcher, and some of them felt sorry for her, and none of that mattered because she was at her kitchen table at midnight about new markets, tax credits, and she had not asked anyone's permission to start. That's not a lesson. That's just what it looked like. If you know someone who needs to hear this story right now, share this video. You never know whose Tuesday morning it might be. The CDFI loan came through in month 17. $210,000 at a below-market rate, structured in phases, with the first draw tied to the completion of the roof replacement and electrical rough-in. The state grant had been joined by a smaller county grant, $18,000, and Claudette had also done something that surprised even her. She had pre-sold 12 months of lease agreements on the professional suites on the second floor, at a rate slightly below market, to a physical therapist, a small accounting firm, and a woman named Dana Pruitt who ran a graphic design studio out of her spare bedroom and had been waiting for a real address for 3 years. The pre-leases were not legally binding in the strictest sense, but they were signed letters of intent, and they were enough to satisfy the CDFI's requirement for demonstrated demand. Buddy Tatum started on the roof in April. Claudette was there on the first morning. She brought coffee in a thermos and stood on the sidewalk watching the crew unload materials, and felt something she did not have a clean word for. It was not happiness exactly. It was more like the sensation of a door opening in a room that had been sealed. She texted Rennie a photo of the crew on the roof. Rennie texted back, "Who are you?" Claudette laughed. Alone on the sidewalk at 7 in the morning with a thermos of coffee, she laughed until her eyes watered. The renovation took 11 months, not 12, not 18, 11, which was 4 months under Buddy's original estimate, and which Claudette attributed to 3 things. The structural bones that had been solid all along, a crew that Buddy had worked with for 15 years, and the fact that she was on site almost every day. She made design decisions quickly. She had opinions about the tin ceiling. It stayed, every inch of it, cleaned and sealed and left in its original cream, and about the floors, which were Douglas fir under 30 years of vinyl tile, and which she had refinished rather than replaced. She chose fixtures that were period-adjacent without being precious. She made the ground floor cafe space warm in the specific way that makes people want to stay. Good light, the right acoustic softness, the sense that the room had history without being a museum. The freight elevator was modernized. Buddy had been right that it was a conversation for another day, and another day eventually came, and it now worked. She hired a property manager, a local woman named Christy Ballard, who had managed 2 other small commercial buildings in Garfield's Crossing, and who told Claudette in her first interview that she'd driven past the Harmon Block her whole life and always thought someone ought to do something with it. Someone did, Claudette said. The ground floor cafe opened on the second Saturday in March, operated by a couple, Theo and Miriam Holt, who had been running a farmer's market booth for 4 years and wanted a permanent space. They served coffee and pastries and a rotating lunch menu, and on their opening day there was a line out the door and down Delaney Street, and Claudette stood on the opposite sidewalk and watched it and did not go in because she did not want anyone to see her face. The professional suites on the second floor were fully occupied within 6 weeks of certificate of occupancy. Dana Pruitt's graphic design studio was the first one in, and she hung a print in her window that said open in letters she had designed herself, and Claudette noticed it one morning when she was walking past and stopped walking for a moment. The third-floor Artist Livework Studios had a wait list before construction was even complete. By the end of the first full operating year, the Harmon Block was generating enough in lease income to service the CDFI loan, cover operating expenses, and produce a modest but real surplus, the kind of surplus that a financial advisor, if Claudette had been in the habit of consulting one, would have described as a foundation. Fletcher heard about it the way people in small towns hear about things. He called her on a Sunday evening, which was unusual. He had a particular tone she recognized from 18 years of marriage, the tone he used when he was recalibrating, when the version of events he had been carrying around no longer matched what was in front of him. "I heard the building is doing well," he said. "It is." A pause. "I didn't know you had all that in you." Claudette stood at her kitchen window. Outside, the parking lot of Lakeview Terrace was quiet. The shopping cart was long gone. She had a lease signed on a small house 3 blocks from the Harmon Block, and she was moving in the following Saturday. "I did," she said. Another pause. "I just wanted to say I think it's great what you've done." "Thank you, Fletcher." She said goodnight and ended the call and stood at the window for a while longer. She was not angry. She had gone past angry somewhere around month 9 of the grant application process, somewhere between the second rejection letter and the third revision of her CDFI pitch deck. And what was on the other side of angry turned out to be something quieter and more durable. Not forgiveness exactly. Not peace exactly. More like the sense of having put something down that you'd been carrying for so long you'd forgotten it had weight. Avery came to see the building on a long weekend in May. She stood in the ground floor cafe and drank a latte, and looked up at the tin ceiling and then looked at her mother. "You did all of this," she said. "Buddy Tatum did a lot of it." "Mom." Claudette smiled. "Yes, I did all of this." Avery was quiet for a moment. She had her father's coloring dark hair, his particular shade of blue eyes, but she had her mother's way of going still when she was thinking something important. "I used to worry about you," Avery said, "after the divorce, not in a dramatic way, just, you know. I'd think about you, in that art in Lakeview Terrace." "Yeah, Lakeview Terrace." She smiled, a small and tender thing. "I'd think about you there, and I'd think, I hope she's okay. And then I'd think, she'll be fine, she's always fine. But I didn't know." She paused. "I didn't know fine was going to look like this." Claudette looked at her daughter across the cafe table, in the building she had rebuilt from the ground up in a town where everyone had seen her come down from where she'd been, and not one of them had thought she'd land here. "Honestly," she said, "neither did I. We want to tell you one more thing before we go. The 4th floor of the Harmon Block, the one Claudette did FERDFEFIS 2, is currently under development. She applied for a second round of historic tax credits in January. She's working with an affordable housing nonprofit to convert it into 4 small residential units, prioritizing artists and small business owners who are already tenants in the building. Glenda Fuchs is helping with the applications. Tanya Osei sent her a note when she heard about it. It said, "I was right about you." Claudette keeps it on her desk. Not the digital version. She printed it out and taped it to the wall above her desk in the small office she now keeps on the 2nd floor of the Harmon Block, in a building she was given because no one thought it was worth anything. She knew what it was worth. She had walked in and looked at the light on a Tuesday afternoon and taken a picture for no reason at all. And that was the moment, not any moment after. Not the grant approval, or the loan closing, or the ribbon cutting, or the opening day line down Delaney Street. That was the moment everything actually began. If you made it to the end of this one, thank you. Genuinely, stories like Claudette's don't always get told because they happen quietly, and loan applications and midnight kitchen tables and walks through dusty buildings that most people drive past without slowing down. If you know someone who's rebuilding right now, share this with them. Drop a comment below and tell us, what would you do with a building that everyone else said wasn't worth fixing? We'll see you in the next one.